Chopper here, chop shop time, and on the chopping block, I've got Gary Greenbaum. And Gary's claim to fame is this is a man who's lived a lifetime of lacrosse and in fact is into the next phase of his life and is still going strong with lacrosse. So Gary, talk about the phases, talk about lacrosse.
Well, the way, my high school did not have lacrosse. And I played other sports and I knew about lacrosse. And the only lacrosse in my area when I was in high school might have been Yorktown, which is a perennial East Coast high school power. And summer of my freshman year in college, I went down to the local area where you threw a ball around, whether it's baseball or with football. And there was a good friend of mine from high school who was back from Princeton with a couple of lacrosse sticks. And so he gave me one of the sticks because he had nobody else to throw it with. And that was it right then. This guy, by the way, his name's Fred Hickok. He ended up playing at Princeton with none other than Bob Mueller. He called him Bobby Mueller, but the Robert Mueller from the investigation. So he has his own little story to tell. And when I asked him, when I found out how old Mueller was and that he played lacrosse at Princeton, I called Fred up and he referred to him as Bobby, which, it just doesn't work in the realm that we saw him in recently. So anyway, going back to Fred, I went back to college and I immediately joined the team. I tried out for the team and I made the team. Back then, there was no D1, D2, D3. There was just NEIA, I think it was what it was. It was just one big group of schools that had lacrosse. We played Penn State in Beaver Stadium. That was a big deal. I wasn't a great player. I was a good player. I was a hustler, a ground ball guy, a defense guy. But I didn't have great stick skills. Some of the guys at Franklin Marshall, guys were coming from the Baltimore area and Long Island. So those were the guys that were really knocking it dead in lacrosse. Anyway, after college, I lost contact with Fred. He moved to, I think, Maryland. And I went on, I opened a business in New York and I refed and then we moved out here in 1989. And my son started playing. Myself and Mitch Fenton, Josh Wallbaum, we started the lacrosse in LA that PV came on with. And so I did it not just for my son, but I thought every boy should have the opportunity to at least taste it. And so my son went, I'll bring you back. It might be convoluted, but my son was playing in the World Games in London, Ontario for a high school team from California. And so I was up there and it doesn't really matter what happened, but about 5 years later, I really got curious about my friend Fred. So, are you familiar with the Boz Carruthers, that family? They did a lot for lacrosse in LA. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he went to Princeton. So I called Boz. I said, can you track him down with the alumni? Through the Alumni Association. He tracked him down. And it turns out that Fred was in London, Ontario with his son, Spencer, playing against my son, Zeke. That's when I was telling you earlier in the pre-interview about the circle and when I talked about it at my induction. It's stuff like that over and over again.
All right. Well, let me back you up a little bit. You mentioned when you first picked up a stick. Were you playing other sports before you got into lacrosse?
In high school, in college, I wrestled a little bit.
In high school.
I'm sorry?
In high school.
In high school, I ran indoor track. I didn't make the basketball team, which broke my heart. And I played football in junior high school, and I played tennis in high school in the spring. So, go ahead.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is that, I honestly think that whole, when you first pick up a stick, when you talk to guys that lived a lifetime of lacrosse like you, they say, I picked up a stick and I never wanted to do anything else. I think for every one of those, there are 10 guys that pick up a stick and go, man, I can't really figure this out. I'm already playing football. I'm already playing soccer, because those stick skills are not, I don't think that they are intuitive. And I think it takes a while. In fact, when my son got into it, I picked up a stick with him and I'm like, this is, I don't get this. And so, when he was in high school, he was trying to recruit the best athletes in high school to join him on the lacrosse field.
Right.
And some of the fastest kids that would have just torn it up in lacrosse, they're like,
Right.
I don't get this stick thing. So I really do think that there's almost something that's innate about whether you can handle a stick and develop those skills or not.
Well, you're talking about the present day with the
Mhm.
wooden sticks. I mean, if Jim Brown had the sticks that we have today, it would have been ridiculous. There would be no stopping him ever. I mean, I'm looking up at the stick on my wall, the old wooden stick, and as a coach, the thing, it was all gut and leather and wood. And as a coach, you were responsible for maintaining the sticks for the kids. And I remember you used to have to bondo them, and the smell from the bondo, I used to get headaches. But it was full-time maintenance. Kids couldn't string their own sticks back then. It was too complicated.
Mhm.
But anyway, if I can go ahead.
Well, you raised another question. You raised the name of Jim Brown, four-time All-American at Syracuse. One of the greatest professional football players of all time. But a lot of people just are waking up to the fact this guy may have been the greatest lacrosse player of all time. And I guess you're old enough that you probably saw him play or aware of him. How good was he? Is he the greatest of all time?
Well, the game has changed. So it's not fair because you don't know what he would have done with the sticks that we have. And we don't know what some of the Syracuse guys or the stars today would have done with his stick. So all I can say is he was certainly the best of his time and probably up through the 80s. I don't think anybody could touch him.
Yeah, I had read that he said if he could have played, if there was professional lacrosse back then, he would have played it. He loved it that much. And because there wasn't, the only place to go was football. And he's maybe the greatest running back of all time for sure.
Well, back in the 80s, Weeb, who was the coach of the New York Jets, he said he thought that lacrosse was going to be the next, this is way back in the 80s, maybe even the 70s, that lacrosse was going to be the next big sport. Of course, he was wrong. It turned out to be soccer, but we're getting there now.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked to a lot of people about crossover sports. Hey, if you were recruiting lacrosse players, where would you want them to play? Oh, basketball, soccer, hockey, even football. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he said the reason he ended up playing lacrosse was he was good at all those other sports, and he felt like this is the one sport that's just like all the rest of them. And so I thought I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it's true. And college coaches will, to this day, argue against the one sport athletes, even the lacrosse. There's so much you can gain IQ wise and muscle memory wise from participating in other sports. I'm sure you played 3 sports. If when you were a kid, you didn't stick with one sport, did you?
I did. Although, that was a very different time too. I mean, I played varsity football, basketball, baseball, all 3 years in high school. And I was a good basketball player. I ultimately was going to get a scholarship to a D1 basketball program. But back then, you could really get away with it. There weren't the club sports. There wasn't this insistence that you play year round. And so I could literally play whatever was. Now, that's changed a lot. I do know that colleges value the multi-sport athlete. When Zach was being recruited, they preferred guys that played 2 sports, and he played basketball as well. But man, you got to put in a lot of time just to keep up with the amount of time that your competitors are putting in on one sport.
Yeah, that's true. But you gain little things, little nuances that those other people are not getting.
True.
I think it balances out.
All right, so I cut you off on your timeline. Get us back onto the Gary Greenbaum timeline.
Well, I wanted to say that. So when I graduated college, I was enamored with lacrosse, and of course, it was the '60s, and there was all kinds of stuff going on, protests, the music, the marijuana, and I was into all of it. And to me, I mean, this is not very PC What happened here? Oh.
Oh, you wanted to show us your little sundial up there. All right, good.
This is not very PC, but I just wanted to turn everybody onto lacrosse, like I was turning them on to a new Stone song or a new variant of the weed I was smoking at the time. And it was just, that's how it was with me. That's kind of the way that I looked at lacrosse. I looked at it as a total cultural phenomenon, something that was different than any other sport. It was different in the rules, it was different in how you played it, and it was different in how you maintained contact with everybody else who played the sport. I remember maybe 5 years ago, I was reffing a tournament in Lake Placid, and it was an older division. And there was a guy, one of the face-off guys was from Franklin Marshall, who was maybe 10 years younger than me. And the other guy was, when I said, you went to F&M, and then the other guy pops up and says, well, I went to Muhlenberg, or I went to Gettysburg or something. And there we were. We had something to talk about. And that is over and over and over again. It always happens.
So you mentioned, that you felt enough of passion about lacrosse and you wanted to share that with everybody else. And that's a pretty strong passion, because a lot of us have private passions, and I like to listen, but for you to say, hey, I thought this was so great, I wanted everybody to experience it. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. I went back to my high school. I got a job teaching to stay out of the war, actually the Vietnam War. And they were just ready to start lacrosse. And I was the only guy, they hated me. The AD hated me because I had a Fu Manchu and I had long hair. In those days, I was getting to the stage where I didn't have a lot of hair anymore, but I had that Fu Manchu. So all of the coaches, they kind of didn't like me, but I started it there. I had kids going to Cornell right away. I still see some of those kids at tournaments coaching. And I actually have one of my better stories coming out of that. If this is the place for it, you tell me if you want to ask me something.
Gary, this is the chop shop, brother. Anything goes. Let's hear it.
Well, it just covers what I've been saying, how eventually everything comes around in a full circle in our sport. I was coaching, the high school that I coached was named Sleepy Hollow. It was in Tarrytown, New York, Westchester County. And we were coaching Scarsdale. How old are you?
I am 67, younger than
Okay. So I'm asking for a reason.
I know you are.
There was a coach of the New York Giants at the time. His name was Ali Sherman.
Sure.
His name. Everybody hated him. The Giants were losing year after year, and everybody hated this guy. So I'm coaching against Scarsdale, and a fight breaks out. In those days, fights were more normal than they are today. It was a little bit more like hockey. Fight broke out. I jumped out, grabbing kids, and I grabbed this one kid. And while I was holding this kid from Scarsdale, another one of my kids was hitting him. And then all of a sudden, Ali Sherman comes running out of the stands. I'm holding his son while his son is getting pelted. Not on purpose. He gets in my face and we get into a fight, a fist fight, right? So it makes the paper. And it wasn't that big a deal. Today, you get in a fight, you're done forever, right? Made the paper. I still have the article. And I walked into the coach's room the next day, and they all stood up. Oh. From that day on, they loved me.
So that's how you earned your stripes with those.
That's right. Here we go again with that.
That's awesome. Hey,
so. Oh, but it's not done yet.
Okay, go.
I'm not done.
All right, fire away.
10 years ago, I'm going to my nephew's wedding in Park City, Utah. And while I'm there, he introduces me because he knows how involved I am with lacrosse. This kid played lacrosse, my nephew. And he introduces me to the Gary Greenbaum of Park City. And we start talking. We got plenty to talk about. Where you're from? Scarsdale, New York. Oh, did you play there? Yeah, I played there. I said, about when did you go there? He said, 66 to 70 or something like that. I said, do you remember a fight with Sleepy Hollow? He goes, oh, yeah, the coach came out and got in a fist fight with Allie Sherman. I reached out my hand. I said, nice to meet you.
Oh,
it was perfect.
So
it was
the legend
yeah,
lived on
right.
decades after that fight. Gary, being a child of the 60s is unique. I mean, what's the old saying that if you can remember the 60s,
you weren't there.
Yeah.
There.
So, but the other question I had, Sleepy Hollow. Now, is this where the Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Yeah. No, Rip Van Winkle.
Oh,
the legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Okay. All right. So legendary stuff, though, fairy tale stuff. Gary,
exactly.
you'd mentioned to me and I wanted to that you had sort of a pivot or a turning point when you were in college. If you haven't told us that, let's hear more about that.
Well, it wasn't. I was drinking a lot, and I wasn't going to class. And we had the lacrosse coach was just a great father figure, just a nice man. He had a speech defect. He would say cheese and crackers like that. He would not enunciate clearly. And the guy was just great. And he allowed me as a sophomore onto the team. And I was a second midfielder on the second midi team, and I knew what I was there for. And he just guided me. And I loved the guy. I really did. And I remember I would get a penalty during a game, and he would scream out, "Cheese and crackers, Greenbaum, you're swinging that stick like a shillelagh." And everybody used to break out. And he got it. He knew that we were making fun of him. But anyway, the discipline of being on a team, which I hadn't been on since high school, didn't get me back into studying, but it got me back into taking care of myself.
Yeah.
And calming down a little bit and staying out of trouble.
Yeah.
Because if I got in trouble, I was going to not be on the team.
Yeah. And so, I mean, part of that is obviously the environment you were in, but the person, each of us comes across people in life that really make a difference. And it sounded like that guy, even though he sounded like Sylvester the cat.
Yeah, right.
He had an impact on you.
Absolute impact for sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about refereeing. I mean, I've talked to a lot of players. I've talked to some coaches, rarely get a chance to talk about a referee. And here's what I'm going to use as sort of our jumping off point. I had a friend that he said he was on an airplane and he sat next to a guy and he said, "What do you do?" And the guy said, "I'm a corner." And my friend, instead of just saying whatever, he goes, "Okay, I want to know the funniest, I want to know the grossest, and I want to know the strangest death scenes you ever investigated." Wow. So I'm going to kind of throw it at you, not necessarily those three categories, but just think back to, your experience reffing with different players, different coaches. What are the funniest things that happened? What were were there particular players or coaches or parents that you had to deal with that were just over the top? I mean, you must have a ton.
Well, I do, but there are so many of them. I never had the parent chasing me off the field. I will say that in the beginning, in the 2000, 2001, 2002, nobody knew, none of the parents and some of the coaches didn't know anything about the rules.
In Southern California.
Right. So it was great. I mean, you threw a flag? Nothing, man. And then we used to go over to them in between at halftime, and we used to ask about questions. You understand this? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? So there was this one game I was doing at Crespi High School, and they have a pretty good parent following. They were playing, another Catholic school in the Valley, Chaminade. And JV game was first, and there was a parent constantly yelling, let them play. Let them play. These guys are, just brutally, outside of the rules, attacking each other. So at the half, I went over to the stands were behind a fence, and I went up calmly, and I said, "So, who has the question about? You want to know why we don't let him play?" I wasn't going to yell at the guy or anything. Not a sound. All of a sudden, this one parent goes, and another parent goes, one on each side.
Yeah.
I knew who the guy was.
Yeah.
And so they turned the guy in, and we had a conversation. It was really funny. Everybody laughed.
Yeah.
But it was really funny. But I would say the most boisterous parent I ever had was at a PV game. It was PV, Redondo Beach at PV. And there was one guy on the far side where the visitors sat, yelling things, not at me, but yelling things like, break his arm, break his arm. So at the half, I went over to him and I said, you can't say stuff like that anymore. That's not what the game's about. Game started again, right back to break his arm, break his leg, break his neck. So I threw him out. I had the police come and take him away. One cop came and escorted him off the field. Turns out everybody knows this guy. It's Bill Clinton's brother who lives in Redondo Beach.
Wow.
Who's a big drinker. Uh-huh. And so it was weird. I had a problem with him at a Beverly Hills game also, but it didn't escalate like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, the next time I'm doing a Redondo game at Redondo, he comes down, tail between his legs, apologies left and right. I'm so sorry. Can I get you dinner? Can I buy you dinner and everything? And so he says to me, so I start talking, asking him questions about Arkansas. So I tell him I'm going to go on a motorcycle trip to Arkansas in the summer. He says, well, in his accent, just like Jimmy, like his brother Bill, well, we know all kinds of people in Arkansas, and I'm good friends with the governor. And if you want, you can stay at his house. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to be smoking weed in this guy's house, right? Yeah. So, but it came around,
Yeah, sure.
and we had a good relationship after that.
All right, so I'm going to share my one referee story, and it's going to give us a chance to segue into family a little bit, because I know you got a son who played. When I was, I had two boys, and the older one was in ninth grade, the younger one was in fifth grade, and I was coaching the younger one's basketball team. And they had a really good team. And even though this is rec league, Gary, you know how fans get, how coaches get. And we were undefeated, and the other team we're playing is undefeated. And by chance, my older son is working the scoreboard, because he did that for made a few bucks. He was not a big basketball guy, but so we're ready to start the game, and there's no ref. And I knew the other coach a little bit. And he goes, have your older son ref. And I'm like, that is not a good idea. I'm coaching, his brother's playing. He goes, no, we got to get this game in here. So he went and talked my older son into, he already had the striped shirt on, and going out there, put a whistle on it and ref this game. So 30 seconds into the game, this coach is in my older son's ear. You're biased. You're, just because it's your dad and your brother, you got to make some calls. So my older son turns full werewolf. By the halftime, he's fouled my younger son out. He's fouled him out, and my son and then he teased me up in the second half. My own son. So we lose a close game. And meanwhile, this coach is in my older son's ear, and my older son's having a hard time. We walk out of the gym, and nobody will talk to me. My older son won't talk to me because I made him referee and made him uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
My younger son won't talk to me because his older brother fouled him out of the game, and my wife won't talk to me. She's like, how could you do that to your boys? And so quietest car ride you ever saw.
Oh, right.
So I'm curious, you have a son, I know at least one who played. Did you coach him? Did you ever ref him?
I coached him in middle school. In the beginning, when the high school league started, there just weren't enough refs. And I must have reffed games He played at Beverly Hills. I must have ref his games 10 times. And there was always that question.
Mhm.
And like you found out in your experience, he got the worst of it.
Yeah, that shifts. It's a hard left there.
Because you can't, it's the appearance of impropriety that takes over.
Yeah.
So you're always harder on him.
Yeah.
And then of course, after he graduated, I would end up doing Beverly Hills games. And I probably overcompensated because everybody knew I coached at Beverly Hills. I started the program there.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where the Beverly Hills coach refused to have me be on any of his games.
Wow.
He banned me from his games, which didn't really matter to me.
Sure.
But about 5 or 6 years later, there was an emergency need for a ref, Beverly Hills at Santa Monica. And they couldn't find a ref. The guy got sick or something, and I lived in Venice. And so they called me, would you do it? I said, I'm banned from Beverly Hills. And they said, well, you got to do it, because when the guy from Beverly Hills, the coach, saw me walking on the field, he didn't know what the hell, he didn't know what to think. But it actually went all right.
Yeah. I had made a note that, first of all, for people that don't know you, you are a member, I think, 2006 inductee to the LA Lacrosse Hall of Fame. Right? Am I right? I got that right?
Correct. I think it was 2006. Yep.
Okay. See,
no, 2008.
Okay. Well, then you told me wrong, because you were my source there.
Yeah. Okay.
But there was a story you had about the crease, I think, that you were going to maybe share with
Well,
us.
I kind of told you that. It was basically the story about my friend Fred Hickok and how it came around in a circle.
All right.
And I used the analogy of a crease.
Okay. So topic is, it's a small world, isn't it? You played in Lake Placid in a 16-over tournament, and you played with or against our founder, Laxratz founder, Mark Haddad. Have I got that right?
No, no. Mark was, he was very tied to the Australians lacrosse. And I played, you were kind of right. I played with a guy who played with Mark.
Okay.
In Australia. Yeah. Weston.
I understand he was a little nasty too back in the day, but he wasn't afraid to hit some guys. So.
Yeah, no, he played the game like he spoke.
All right.
Is the best way to say it.
All right. Well, let's talk about the game and how it's changed. I mean, you played back in the days of, Bondo and gut and wooden sticks. The equipment's coming a long way, and so has the game. When you and I were talking earlier, I mentioned that my son, Zach, whom you refereed both as a player in high school and as a coach in high school, he was pretty physical in high school. And I said, man, you must have been throwing a lot of flags at him. And you said, no, it wasn't that bad, but he was physical. I mean, I've got video that
physical's okay.
Yeah. But he even said, so I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to be talking to Gary. He threw a lot of flags at you. And I said, Zach, you'd be obsolete today. And he said, Dad, no, I wouldn't, because I would have adjusted. Instead of playing at 220 and running over everybody, I'd have played at 190.
Right.
And so I'm curious, the changes in the game you've seen, boys and girls, and, has it been for the better of the game? Is it a safer game?
Yeah. First of all, the reason why guys on PV like Zach and some of the other defenders on PV didn't get flagged a lot was because they were coached well. They knew they were coached on how to be physical and not sloppy. When we get to ref a high-end game, like PV against St. Margaret's or games like that, and I've had quite a few of them, we are not that worried. We're more worried about Jimmy Burrell screaming at us than we are about somebody getting hurt, because the guys know how to play the game. Oh, sure, they get sloppy. They can get sloppy and miss a check and slash somebody, but it's never intentional. It's rarely intentional. And so reffing a game like that is easier than reffing a game where the ball's on the ground all the time, because that's when all the bad stuff starts. Yeah. The game, there's two there's two ways to look at the game in California and how it's changed. There's the game in California and the game nationally. The game nationally has gotten at every level faster, more refined. I don't know, do you remember when every 10 seconds you came out of the box,
Yeah.
you had to get it back in 10 seconds whenever you came out of the box? That changed the game. No more horns for a timeout. It was always on the fly. Then they widened the box, so it was even faster. It's incredible what they've done with the game. And now this year, at least at the college level, they changed the face-off rule. So you don't have those 20, 30-second scrums on the ground with the two guys going around in a circle because you can't face off with your knee down. You have to be standing up. So there's all kinds of changes, and every one of them has been to the benefit of the game. Every one of them.
And, we talked offline. I mean, obviously they're looking out for the players' well-being because, you get a concussion. That's a life-changing event at times. And so they've done a lot better job, I think, of really trying to protect players in those instances with their head.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about something before we get out of here. You are 76 years old and you still play, right?
Well, I stopped. I didn't play last year because the tournaments were all, canceled. I was playing pickup in Glendale on Sundays, and I play every year in the Florida. I think this is the Florida one, the Florida Lax Classic, and the Lake Placid in upstate New York. The Lake Placid tournament is probably the biggest tournament in the world, in the country. The last year that we had it was 2019. There were 240 teams. So it's a huge tournament. So I'm at the point where I'm going to hang it up because I looked back and I am thinking to myself that I'm playing just so I can say that I'm playing at my age. I'm still enjoying it, but to be honest with you, I'm enjoying reffing a lot more.
Interesting.
And I still ref those tournaments. I did a tournament in Arizona 3 weeks ago. I did 20 games in 2.5 days. And of course, they're only 1 hour games, but still, it's a lot of work for a guy my age. But when it comes to age, in this issue, I don't know if it's in the digital issue or the hardcover issue of Lacrosse magazine that everybody gets if you're a U.S. Lacrosse member. There's an article about a guy named Cookie, who I played against for years in Lake Placid. He was a 2-time All-American at Princeton. He was Player of the Year. He's in 5 different Hall of Fames, including the National, and he's 80 years old and still playing. Wow. But I don't want to take anything away from Cookie. He's not a middie. He's a goalie. So it's a little bit easier because you're not running as much, but you have to have the reflexes, and he's still a good goalie.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome.
But, it's great. I played 2 years ago, I played with Dom Starsia on a team, and it was a 65 and over. Wow. In Lake Placid. Wow. And there's a case of a guy who loves the game, Dom Starsia, Virginia, a player at Brown, he is lacrosse, and he doesn't care. He doesn't care how he looks playing at 65. He loves the game,
So I'm going to tell you, I think choosing a sport may be a lot like choosing a significant other. And that is, if you want to pick one that you can go the rest of your life with. And with lacrosse, you certainly have done that. Amazing.
I have, and I didn't expect it because there, 20 years ago, there was no 40 and over, and there was no 50 and over. Now there's 70 and over, at quite a few tournaments. Yeah. So, and look, it's not great lacrosse, but it's still lacrosse.
Sure.
It really is.
Well, we're about out of time, Gary. I want to tell you something, man. It's been fascinating talking to you. And I got a feeling that you've got another hour's worth of stories. So we'll get back together sometime. So I want to thank my guest, Gary Greenbaum. I want to thank our producer, Lisa, who puts all this together and makes it good. I'm Chopper. This is the Chop Shop. We are brought to you by Laxratz. What, you got one last thought there, Gary?
Could I say one thing?
Sure.
You know, I'm very involved in the reffing. If you're listening to this podcast and you've played the game, especially if you've played the game, help us grow the game. There's opportunities. You make a few bucks, you live in the game, and you grow the game. So look at Socoloa, which is a Southern California lacrosse organization, Gloloa, which is up in the LA area, the San Diego area. We can use you. We really can. Thanks, Chopper.
All right, Gary, we're going to get out of here, brother. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
We'll
Thank
see
you. Bye.